Welcome, everybody. This is Bob Hollis here, proud to be hosting another webinar for the California Product Stewardship Council. Just a couple of things for orientation. One, the webinar is being recorded, and a link to the location of that recording will be sent to everybody who attends the webinar. All attendees are muted by default. We have quite a few people registered for today, and that helps keep down the background noise. However, we greatly encourage questions. So if you have anything pops into mind, it might be answered later in the webinar, but enter it immediately so you don't forget it. And at some point, Joanne will be digging into the questions, and we'll be making sure we get to all those before the end of the webinar. If you run into any technical challenges, feel free to enter them in the question tab. But if you can't even get to that, go to gotowebinar.com, resources, FAQs. And with that, I'll pass it to Joanne.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome everyone. Your introduction will be given by our Executive Director, Doug Cobold.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I get the honor of kicking off this webinar talking about the policies promoting clothing reuse, repair, and repurposing. We have three distinguished panelists on the webinar today. Alexa Keelty, who is one of our board members and works for the City of San Francisco, City and County of San Francisco Department of the Environment. Kate Wilkins, who works for CalRecycle, and then also Joanne Brash from our own staff. So I am going to turn it over to them, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Doug, and welcome everybody. As mentioned, this is a webinar hosted by the California Product Stewardship Council. And trying to advance my slides. So our goal is just to keep everyone engaged. We want this webinar, it's an hour. We want it to be interesting and we want it engaging. So we encourage everyone to ask questions as they arise into the chat box. We also want to use the chat box and the questions as a way to kind of support or agree with certain conversations and topics that are being discussed. So one way that you can do this is by adding +++ and the slide number or the topic you support and agree with. If you have a question or if you would like clarification, you could do question mark, and ask a specific clarifying or discussion question. If you think of something after the webinar, I always encourage everyone to follow up. I'm available by email, joanne@calpsc.org. As Doug introduced, we have three of us that will be speaking today: Alexa from San Francisco Environment, Kate Wilkins from CalRecycle, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the California Product Stewardship Council. We'd like to take a moment and thank the sponsors for today's webinar. These agencies and businesses: San Francisco Department of the Environment, Recology, City of Napa, and Napa Recycling and Waste Services have all donated to sponsor this webinar to guarantee free access to everyone. So thank you to our sponsors and thank you to all of those who have attended today. The California Product Stewardship Council, our goal is extended producer responsibility in whatever form it comes in, but our mission is to engage producers in complex end-of-life solutions. And these solutions are ones that reduce the cost burden on local government and taxpayers so that it's a multi-stakeholder approach to material management. We're a small but mighty team. There are 5 of us on the staff, and our 13-member board is representative of several local governments, cities, counties, urban, rural. We have some haulers, some waste haulers, and other recyclers on our board of directors. It is my great opportunity to introduce Alexa Keelty of the San Francisco Department of the Environment, who will be sharing her work with the department on textiles specifically. Alexa?
Hey everyone, my name is Alexa Keelty, Department of the Environment, San Francisco. We are a city department in San Francisco, and we run a number of different programs ranging from climate to toxics reduction to green building, education, equity. to name a few. I work on the Zero Waste team, and we have two main goals in the Zero Waste program. One is to cut our landfilling in half, so sending less, 50% of what we're sending to landfill, we want to eliminate, and we want to send nothing to incineration. And the other goal is to reduce our generation by 15% by the year 2030. What does that mean? We want to produce less material in San Francisco, and that includes clothing. And we need producers at the table to help us achieve that goal. We know we can't recycle and compost our way out of this climate crisis, so we really need to start looking at reduction. Next slide, please, Joanne. So what are the costs? Well, we did a waste characterization study a while back, which we basically look at what we're sending to landfill, and what we notice is 20,000 tons of textiles are getting disposed of by San Francisco. That represents the cost of that to dispose is $5 million per year. So the ratepayers of San Francisco are paying that $5 million disposal cost. That is not being paid for by producers, only ratepayers. We've piloted a different types of methods to reduce that amount of landfilling. One, we did at one point tell San Francisco residents to bag their unwanted textiles and put it in the blue bin along with their recyclables. That proved to not be a particularly successful program because those bags actually get compacted in the packer trucks, and many times those bags break, and then you get moisture in those bags. So once the textiles have moisture or get dirty, we found that there was no market that we could identify for those textiles. So we did discontinue that program. We also looked at adding textiles to our bulky item collection program. So we allowed San Franciscans to call up for a free pickup through their refuse bill of their textile clothing at their house. That proved to be cost prohibitive. It was over $60 per pickup. That clothing was getting donated to St. Vincent de Paul and Lane County up in Oregon, but that program was also discontinued. We've also looked, we've funded a number of different textile collection programs through Recycle for Change, Goodwill, among others. And as you can see from the chart below, there's been huge numbers of pounds, that's in pounds, of textiles collected over the years. There's a huge need for San Franciscans to find outlets, convenient outlets to recycle and reuse their clothing. Next slide, please. In 2014, we also partnered with ICO and a number of different brands to do in-store collection. At that time in 2014, we had a really low participation rate. I think at that point in time, customers were not used to bringing in their used clothing to stores while they're purchasing new clothing. So we did get a low turnout, but we did try out different methods. What we have found is that San Francisco needs additional funding in order to improve collection, transportation of textiles, and also to improve the sorting and categorization of clothing so we can market the clothing at highest and best use. So what we're really looking to do is expand the folks at the table to bring in funding so we can reach these cities' goals. I'm going to hand it to Katie is next.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, momentary scary pause.
Thanks, Alexa, so much. And I'll just introduce Kate. So Kate represents CalRecycle. CalRecycle is the leading agency who manages several product programs. They are very innovative, several different departments within that agency. And Kate is here from the Waste Characterization and the Policy Department. So thank you, Kate.
No problem. Hi, everyone. Kate Wilkins. Like Joanne said, work in the policy office. In CalRecycle, I've got to work on some of our 2018 waste characterization, which was just released. The results of that, I believe, in the last 6 months. If you can go to the next slide, Joanne. So I'm going to go over a little bit because we have some interesting data on textiles. I think this complements, well, I'm first of all super excited about the SF environment data. That is really useful and really interesting. We have very high kind of statewide level data that I'm going to go over from our waste characterization. So bear with me while I take you through a little bit of how we get our statewide numbers, which include textiles. So we have a few data, when we do a waste characterization, we're pulling from different data sources. And this is our disposal-based facility study. So that happens like at landfills or at transfer stations. So in 2018, we used 3 different sets of data. We have our composition data, which is the data collected from sorting waste samples. So that's what you consider the folks on the ground. Those are the pictures of them sorting through materials. I have a picture of that next. That's this data. The sorters are either doing, by hand, literally into different categories, of which I think there were 94 in 2018, or they might do visual sorts if it's kind of a pretty homogeneous pile, only a certain number of materials. And then we have quantity data that's obtained from surveying vehicles that come into the facility. So if we're at a specific landfill, there's someone standing at the front of the gate and kind of tracking the trucks coming in. That's how we establish how much is coming in from each source sector, right? Our residential, commercial, and self-haul. And then we have disposal data that we get from CHARACTERIZATIONs, reporting requirements in our internal systems. That used to be DRS, disposal reporting, and some of you on this call may be familiar and super excited about RDRS, which is our recycling and disposal reporting system, which is the new system we made under AB 901. From DRS, we get the annual reported disposal tonnage, and we can kind of use these different data sources to come up with our statewide tonnages. So next slide, please. This is a picture of how we do vehicle selection at a facility. So you're going to see this vehicle, this waste management truck kind of dumping a load, has been selected. There's someone waiting there watching this happen, and it's going to pull out a 200-pound sample from that load. And then on the next slide, you'll see a picture of the field crew sorting the sample. So we're even going to open bags. We're going to look at the contents of each of those bags, kind of sort it down into, again, those different 94 material categories in 2018. They have a sort table. Things that fall through might be like mixed residue. So kind of really getting a pretty close look at some of these different material categories. Let's see, next slide. So in 2018, CalRecycle, this was its 5th statewide waste characterization study. We contracted with Cascadia Consulting to quantify, again, those 94 different material types for commercial, residential, and the self-haul sectors in California. We collected 892 samples from 34 different disposal facilities. Like I mentioned, that might be a landfill or sometimes a transfer station. And that sampling was done between late 2018, October 2018 to April 2019. We also did a small study quantifying and characterizing processing residuals for some MRFs. That was interesting, and I believe that data is in our published 2018 waste characterization report. Next slide, please. So here's the fun part. So this is the data since our first 1999 study. The data we have on textiles. So you can see, and sorry, I didn't know which was the best way to do this. I have the oldest at the bottom, and then you're going up to the most current. So starting in 1999 through our 2014 study, we only had one category, textiles. So kind of everything textiles related, I don't have the definition in front of me, but was put into that category. So you'll see we have the total textile tons in that 3rd column, and then the percent of the waste stream in that sample year. And sometimes I put both of those because people might get like, oh, look, actually, it went down from 2004 to 2008. Well, it actually did in that one, but let's say from 2014 to 2018, in 2018, textiles altogether were a smaller percentage of the waste stream than in 2014, but there's actually a larger amount of textiles and tonnage. Obviously, our overall tonnage disposed went up. So I wanted you to see both of those numbers. In 2018, that was the first year we actually kind of expanded our textile categories, tried to get a little more granular. We tried to separate organic textiles and synthetic, mixed, or unknown textiles. And then we pulled out shoes, purses, and belts. You can see I have 2021. This is our upcoming study that was supposed to be 2020. You can guess there are a few things that may have sidelined that study. So it's happening starting next year. And we decided not to go differentiate between organics and synthetic. We heard from our contractor and from our results that was really hard to do on the fly. If we're really trying to take a close look and make those calls, like it's expensive and time consuming. So for our upcoming study, we decided to just split it into cloth and clothing and shoes, purses, and belts. And then I have one more slide.
Kate, sorry to interrupt, Kate, real quick. One quick question on the slide before you leave it. So there was a question, do you include sheets and towels here?
Yes.
Okay,
this would be included. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that, I mean, it depends. If they could tell that those were like cotton or organic, that would have been in the organic category, maybe in 2018. Again, if it was a hard call to make, it might have just been something put in the synthetic mixed and unknown category. I'm not totally sure, but in 2021, that will just go in the cloth and clothing category if we saw sheets. Yeah. And then for my the last slide, because of COVID, we thought it might be interesting to see the amount of PPE in the waste stream. So, and this is probably could have what might have fallen into textiles in a different year or in an earlier study. So yeah, we added this PPE category. So we're interested to see that'll include things like face masks, which could be cloth face masks. They could also be, the dust mask. That would probably be the two things in textiles, or maybe some different kinds of gloves. So that's interesting and something hopefully we pull that out of textiles this year also. And that's all I have. So yeah, I know we're not really taking questions, so I'll pass it back to Joanne, but hopefully that gave you a good idea of what we're looking at textiles wide in California. And I realized I didn't even really talk about the numbers, but textiles are, I think you're going to talk about it next slide. Perfect. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you so much. And, great example and description of the methods done. So what this table is showing is basically this 2018 data presented in two different ways. As Kate described, in the 2018 waste characterization, they broke it out into three categories: organic textiles, synthetic textiles or mixed unknown, and then also shoes, purses, and belts. So as you can see on the bottom table, you can see each of these categories aggregated across every type of stream they studied. And then the top table is the combination of all three categories of textiles per waste stream. So let's go over the top table first. As you can see, let me move my thing so I can see the numbers. When you combine all three categories of textiles, when you're looking at the franchise commercial disposed waste, so this is the waste that is hauled by the franchised haulers from commercial locations. Textiles is the 5th most prevalent material in that waste stream. When you look at single family residential, looking at all the materials coming out and combining the three textiles categories, textiles is 5th most prevalent material in the waste stream. That's equating 6% of the materials coming out of single family residences are considered textiles to this definition. You can see, it's not a small amount by any means. And what's important as we move forward and we discuss the best ways to manage it is really using this firsthand data. The City of Napa, one of the sponsors of this webinar, has also provided some of their collection data. City of Napa, similar to the City of San Jose, had a textile program that was appointment-based, where a pickup box truck will come to the address and they'll pick up the approved products. For the City of Napa, that included e-waste and bagged textiles. In 2019, City of Napa had over 5,000 appointments where they collected both e-waste and then 27 tons of unwanted textiles. And the way this program works is because the e-waste is actually profitable for local governments. And the city of Napa and several other collectors have donation markets for the textiles. So the cost of sending the truck to the location, picking up the materials, is subsidized by the profits made on the e-waste. As soon as markets are unavailable for free or profit-making markets for those collected textiles, this program will cost more money and be more difficult to manage. The California Product Stewardship Council, we conducted a post-consumer textile waste characterization at some large thrift stores in the Bay Area. Special thank you to Green Mary, who is a zero waste event organization who donated staff time to this characterization study. We took 10 staff over 2 8-hour days to sort through over 2,000 garments. We are using this data to figure out and characterize what type of garments are not really being sold in the thrift stores. So the waste stream or the textile stream that we were characterizing were the garments that were deemed that were unable to sell in the store, were getting bundled and sold to secondary markets. And what we found is, as you can see on this screen, it cost our staff about $1.42 per pound to sort. This includes all the staff time, the breaks, the setup, the data entry, etc. But when you break it down, the cost per garment, we are averaging about 2 minutes per garment, costing about 65 cents to characterize each garment by 11 criteria. Some of those criteria are presented here today. As you can see, over 90% of what we were characterizing was deemed sellable as is, meaning there was not any necessary modifications in order for it to be ready to be sold, meaning it didn't need repairs, it didn't necessarily need to be washed. So over 90% was sellable. We also found that over 55% was deemed recyclable. And I know this definition can be very complex. We only used one criteria for this definition. We used the percentage of primary fiber as our criteria to define recyclability. And we used the threshold of 85% of a single polymer within the textile in order to qualify it as recyclable. Mind you, this does not include other barriers to recyclability, things like labels, buttons, zippers, removing other extra materials. So again, using that singular criteria of defining recyclability, we found 55% of the unwanted clothes were recyclable. There were many unique types of fibers, many unique brands involved. As you can see, 45 unique fibers, but what's more important is the number of unique fiber blends. When you look at a lot of the clothing and the textiles that are on the market, and then you start asking, what are the criteria that we're really looking at? A lot of the recyclers and secondary markets are really looking at fiber content. So when you have a lot of variation in 100% cotton, 99% cotton, 98% cotton, every single variation and combination of fiber blends was counted. And we had 275 different blends in this unwanted textile stream. And CPSC is not the only organization that's studying reuse and reuse potential. As you can see, some of these other graphics really highlighting what percentage of what's collected is deemed recyclable, how much is deemed reusable. So up here on the top right, you can see a graphic from the Renewal Workshop, an organization based out of Oregon who's collaborating with several brands to repair garments and get them back on the market. Below, you see a flow chart published by the RSS report on textile circularity, where they've also characterized how much of the collected clothes going to thrift stores is deemed resellable, how much is reusable, and how much needs to be processed in a way to make it more functional by recycling or shredding. So when we talk about policies and we talk about when you would want to introduce a policy, you need to have specific goals in mind. And so a lot of the organizations and agencies here today on this call, whether it's state or local, we have many attendees from outside of California. But what we need to acknowledge is here in California, our government does have directives for landfill diversion. We do have goals to reduce the materials going to the landfill. So as we do these characterization studies and we identify the top materials, these are the materials that are then going to be addressed by different programs or policy interventions. Another goal why you would want to introduce a type of policy is to actually generate the funds necessary to support a sustainable program. Oftentimes, and we'll talk about this in a few slides, there are different ways that you can intervene on a market, but might not have the most holistic and sustainable outcome as if the types of interventions that have funding to support the directives. We're also going to talk about how to expand and support regional economies. Investing in reuse, investing in repair is an investment in jobs and how we can expand the labor in this particular industry here in California. And ultimately, our goal is to level the playing field. There's always going to be leaders, and we want to find ways to reward the leaders. And oftentimes, when you have a policy and you have these regulatory off-ramps, you build incentives for the brands and the producers to engage in the type of behavior that we're trying to drive. It also helps level the playing field by looping in the laggards. We know across the market, there are many brands who have introduced take-back programs, who've introduced repair and renovation programs. And so we need to find ways to loop in the others so that it's economical and equitable, and also let the leaders continue to lead. So what is extended producer responsibility and what is product stewardship? This is a type of material management programs that have a different funding mechanism than a government-run program. So typically with EPR and product stewardship, the funding from wherever it comes from goes to an industry group who actually runs the program. The theory behind this is that if you're the producer of the goods, you're going to have the most direct control to drive recyclability and to drive efficiency in the program. There are different types of structures and there's different types of funding mechanisms within these types of material management programs. On the left side of your screen, you have what we call true EPR. These are programs that are 100% funded by the brands themselves. Here in California, we have, I believe we're up to 11 EPR and product stewardship programs. The programs that we have in California that are 100% funded by industry are rechargeable batteries, recalled products, pharmaceuticals, sharps. Then in the middle of this graphic, you see what we call product stewardship. And these are programs that are co-funded. So whether it's consumers only, so here in California, there is a consumer fee added to carpet, mattresses, and paint. But what's different about this type of management program is that fee money doesn't go directly to the government. It goes to the stewardship organization. And the stewardship organization, which is a nonprofit, a non-governmental organization, runs the program according to the directives and performance standards set in the law. On the right side of this graphic, you see voluntary action. This is where there's no funding necessarily behind it, but you see brands and producers voluntarily acting in ways to drive circularity in their material management by voluntarily having take-back programs, by incorporating recycled content into their products. These are just great examples of voluntary product stewardship. But as you'll see as we move on, it's just not enough. We really do need to level the playing field and loop in the laggards. I will say, although this graphic is based on California's programs, France does have a true EPR program for fashion and clothing. So it would be on the left side of this particular spectrum, where France has an EPR program for their garments. There are other types of policy tools. And here in the California Product Stewardship Council, there are certain situations where some of these policy tools are great. And we do feel like there are times and situations where they might be good standalone policies. But it's our opinion and our belief and through our experience that these tools are not as effective if standalone policies. And oftentimes you can build these into a stewardship program. But let's take a moment and let's discuss these different policy tools. A landfill ban, banning textiles from going to the landfill. It's been done in Canada, it's been done in a couple other local jurisdictions, but what we find is no ban without a plan. If you don't give residents some sort of education or collection infrastructure, it's not going to be as effective to actually move economies of scale for circular economies. Labeling requirements. Again, in some situations, these are great standalone tools. CPSC recently sponsored legislation for labeling and standardized labeling for solar panels. Although it can drive transparency and it can make the collection and sorting significantly easier, it's a great component of an overall program, but as a standalone, it does not address the volume of materials or the funding necessary needed to expand our sorting and grading capacity. Mandatory collection, whether it's mandatory collection at the stores, curbside collection. CPSC is of the frame of thought that just mandating collection isn't a holistic approach and doesn't really address the inadequacies of the market. It doesn't help with introducing new technologies. It doesn't help with supporting the brands who are participating. And then there's deposit systems like the bottle bill and program here in California. And again, in some circumstances, they might be effective, but these types of programs are larger scale of administration and don't provide the financial support for that market development and that recycling infrastructure. So when we talk about stewardship programs and what are the components in each of these programs here in California, there are these different categories which we recommend to be included in every type of stewardship program. You need to define the products that are going to be included in paying into that system. You need to mandate performance standards on how these products will be managed. Do they need to have a certain recycling rate? Do they need to include a certain reuse or renovation rates? You can build these mandates into your policy, and then effectively the stewardship organization has the flexibility to meet them, whichever methods they deem most effective. You also build in funding mechanisms. We've talked about consumer fees, we've talked about producer funded. We've learned from experience here in California that we will not have an entirely consumer funded program. What we've learned from mattresses, carpet, and some of these other programs is that for the most effective design changes and circular economy, the brands need to pay their fair share into the program. That way, they're not just handed money and handed a program, they actually have skin in the game and motivation to actually make the most efficient program to save themselves money and to reduce waste. Additionally, you have certain goals for, you cover your operating costs, reporting requirements, and oversight are all required components of stewardship programs. And the goals, if you were to introduce a stewardship program for textiles, what would be the goals? We've looked at all the different types of products and how they're currently regulated, and we have opportunities to think of new innovative ways to manage textiles and clothing. We want to encourage producers to fund a program. We want to develop collection infrastructure and develop the markets for those materials that are collected. We want to create new jobs, especially green jobs for sorting, grading, and getting the materials to the recyclers and renovators. And ultimately, supporting the thrift stores. Our current system has bared the largest burden on our thrift stores and our charities. And right now, especially due to COVID, there is an overwhelming volume of materials that these thrift stores are collecting. Subsequently, their international markets, some have closed, some have described potentially taxing. Their international markets are not as stable as they once were, and thrift stores are looking for help. So here at the California Product Stewardship Council, we're here to discuss ways that we can help reduce the cost burden from our charities and from our local governments into a more holistic program. So when we talk about these programs that are here in California and we talk about some of the requirements, we'll talk for a second about some of the precedent that has been set before we go into talk about innovative ways we could apply these concepts to textiles and clothing. One of the requirements and performance standards that often are included in a stewardship program are what we call convenient collection standards. And this is what we call a performance standard because we do not dictate the methods that are collected, whether it's using a kiosk, whether it's using a thrift store, whether it's using a mail-back option. The point is the policy doesn't mandate the technology or the method. All that the policy really aims to do is set a convenient collection. How do we guarantee convenient access for the residents to this program? And as you can see, really the different products, oftentimes convenient collection standards are number of drop-off sites per county. Maybe it's the distance the resident has to travel for a drop-off site. Or maybe it's just example for mattresses. There needs to be at least one permanent location per county in addition to temporary events and curbside pickup. So again, with the convenient collection standards, you just mandate how many people should be guaranteed access to this program, and you let the stewardship organization create the methods themselves. Additionally, within stewardship program requirements, you can mandate reuse and renovation. Here is a prime example of how we can build and promote reuse of these materials that are covered by these programs. Obviously, for needles and medicine, there are not opportunities for reuse or repair. But as you go down the different product types, mattresses and carpet have both legislated mandates to meet and include reuse into their programs. And as we've seen for both products, product types, the stewardship programs and the stewardship organizations find innovative ways to guarantee access to the reuse markets, whether it's Habitat for Humanity or mattress cleaners. It funds and supports these reuse markets. Stewardship programs often include additional financial incentives. So as they're collecting the money, whether they're collecting it from brands or they're collecting it from consumers, that money must be spent on very specific things. And in the precedent set here in California, Those financial incentives are provided to those who are collecting and sorting the covered products. It includes transportation costs, the trucking, the labor time, and for anyone who manages programs up in Northern California, you can imagine just the trucking and drive time alone is a significant cost to the management of those materials. These programs also include infrastructure grants, including technology upgrades. This would be a great time to announce to everyone that both the California Carpet Stewardship Program and the California Mattress Stewardship Program both have open calls for grant funding. If you go to their websites or you go to the CalRecycle website, you can navigate yourself to the call for funding and call for proposals, where they are supporting through direct payments the collection and processing of mattresses and carpet. So again, this is the financial incentives for participation and effective management of these materials. One of the other benefits of mandating a stewardship program, as we'll talk about in a few slides, is the additional transparency. Through voluntary action alone, the brands are not required to publish how much of the materials collected were repaired and entering the market as clothing. What percentage were processed and into what markets did they go into? So the annual reporting component of these programs are actually one of the greatest benefits, arguably. CPSC, we remain very active in both legislation and the programs that are already in place. CalRecycle is the oversight agency for the programs here in California and is the agency who reviews the annual report, who reviews the performance, and ultimately, through the public process, allows stakeholders to engage and also contribute opinions, comments, and input into the program. So there's opportunities here with a type of product that is high value, like textiles and clothing, and a type of program that might be introduced for this material might not look the same as it does for hazardous products. So we have an opportunity in California, an opportunity to lead with innovation in mind. And when we look at what is needed to expand re-commerce for clothing, we're looking at large-scale investments. To build a recycling plant and to collect and sort at scale is no small feat. We need to expand the secondhand and e-commerce. We need to help get more thrift stores online and directly to the consumers. We need to help with that drive transparency. You know, as we say, you know, voluntary action is wonderful, but until we can get everyone involved and get all the data publicly available, there's still work to be done. And again, really promoting through direct payments, grants through designers and brands, and really looking at ways that we can support the mending business. If anyone knows any great menders, any great repairs or refashion brands who are willing to take clothing and add a little bit of intervention, we're talking cutting, sewing, and redesigning a product, please promote them, share their message widely. But what can everyone do today? Today on the webinar, we have a wide range of attendees. We have government representatives, we have businesses, and we have consumers. Actually, we're all consumers in some form or another. But there's direct things that we can recommend to attendees and to promote in your local jurisdictions. Start gathering your waste data, especially on textiles. If you want questions on how CPSC or CalRecycle or San Francisco has begun collecting our data, we can absolutely share our methods. We recommend releasing reuse-specific grants. CalRecycle has just closed a round of reuse grants. We're hoping for another round soon. So please apply and contact CPSC if you need help with your application. And contact your thrift stores. I can't tell you, I've gotten more calls in the last 6 months from thrift stores asking for help than we ever have at CPSC. And the calls are loud and clear. The thrift stores need a thrift store. The thrift stores need somewhere to take their clothes that they can't sell, to take the materials that they can't process, to guarantee that they will be processed in a very circular manner. So again, the thrift stores, they need help. And how can we help them? As businesses, you can buy secondhand. You can, buy your office supplies from surplus. You can do what you can and pay into the economies that you hope to drive forward. And again, as consumers, looking into mending, looking into supporting the brands that do have the take-back programs, and prioritizing reuse and repurposing would be a great opportunity right now. If anyone has any brands or any mending services that they would like to promote, please chat away and share those examples. And now I'd like to bring all the panelists with their cameras on and our executive director, Doug, to share the questions, and we can start moderating. So again, if you have any questions that came up, please go ahead and ask them right now.
Okay, so thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Alexa. Excellent presentations from all of you. I'll take the first question that has been unanswered, and I'll go down through the list, and I've already kind of assigned some already. But the first one was, you may get to this, but similar to the beverage containers in California and other states, what about assessing a collection fee at the original point of sale to help finance residential curbside collections? I'd like to think the fee could be pretty nominal to consumers. That was by Jeff Wilson, and he has actually left. But to answer Jeff's question, there's a possibility of a consumer fee. We usually like to start with visible consumer fees at the check stand, because that's a lot of administrative burden for the stores who are selling the products. And then for curbside collection, just for a point of reference, it costs about $250,000 a year to put a collection truck on the road to collect 1,000 households a day, 5 days a week. So it can get quite expensive. That's what it costs us for our trash to be collected every day, and or every week for each household. So it can get quite expensive, but there are certainly options out there for collecting these materials that are convenient, whether it be back at the stores or at other locations. And then those programs may be subsidized through either a producer fee collected at the back end or a visible consumer fee collected at the front end. Okay, Alexa, this one is for you. The ICO San Francisco program discontinued because the public was unaccustomed to bringing used textiles into stores. How thorough was communicating to the public, so-called public relations, PR?
Yeah, I definitely think there could have been more funding around, or more resources put towards PR and marketing and communicating to the public that was an option. So we were limited in our government budget getting the word out. But we did work with ICO. ICO also helped us with some of the marketing, but we definitely could have done more around that. We also ran into some issues around the cost of shipping the textiles. The stores were packaging the used textiles and sending them to the ICO sorting locations in the Los Angeles area, and that became really cost prohibitive. So I think there were multiple issues. We didn't have the resources to do the necessary marketing to San Franciscans, and the cost to ship the textiles to the sorting facilities was also cost prohibitive.
Thank you, Alexa. Okay, there was another question for you. I just jumped right over it. Is the increase in textile waste as a percent due to a net increase in textile waste, or is it due to the fact that the other waste streams have been reduced, banning plastic straws, for example? That was on your slide, I think, about what percentages.
I'm not sure which slide they're referring to, but I know, maybe Kate, you can chime in more. I mean, I know that fast fashion, the amount of clothing that's being consumed has increased dramatically. I don't know, Joanne, if you want to chime in with that. So I know that's definitely having an impact that we're seeing at the waste stream. The numbers that I actually provided were quite old, So we will be getting some updated numbers soon, that 20,000 tons going to landfill every year. We are updating our waste characterization study at this moment, so we'll get some new numbers. But I don't know, Joanne or Kate, do you want to talk about increase in disposable fashion, how that's impacting the waste stream, more current numbers?
That might be better for Joanne. I mean, we did not do much. We didn't do any analysis on the specific textile number. And I thought, but maybe I wasn't paying attention because you said it was for Alexa. In general, in our waste characterization, where in the statewide, where the percentage of textiles went down, but it went up in tonnage. I mean, we sampled 94 different categories, right? We saw big increases in things like packaging. You know, overall, there were a lot of things that were increasing, including textiles. So if that was in reference to that, you can dig into that report. It's interesting to see what else in California caused. Most things increased, but that's on the statewide level. So I don't know, Joanne, if you want to speak more.
I think that hits the mark. I think as you expand your definition of certain materials, you will see an increase. So in the 2018, there were the 3 categories of textiles, but there was still one larger category in the previous study. So I think that also contributes to some degree.
Okay. Joanne, you answered this question, but just for the sake of the audience, belts and shoes, is leather, synthetic leather, and pleather considered textiles? And you said yes, synthetic and natural.
Yes,
okay.
Leathers, belts, these are all considered textiles.
All right, then is the trend moving toward a relative increase in synthetic textile waste in contrast to organic textile waste?
I would say yes. I mean, but I think that trend has really been starting since the 70s. When we did our post-consumer characterization, we were able to break it down by category. And when you looked at categories like bottoms, so pants, skirts, you did see a higher likelihood of natural fibers. But as you broke it down to categories like undergarments and even tops, you did see an increase of variety of synthetics and volume.
Thank you. So Connie asked this question, but she's left. If 90% is sellable, why consider recycling at all?
Yes, and that's the same pool of clothing that we were characterizing for both. Obviously, with the waste hierarchy, we would prefer to resale over recycle. But at one point, if there are no markets and a demand for recycling, that might be an opportunity in the future.
All right, I'm not sure who's best to answer this one, but I think I do. Does recyclable mean fiber conversion?
Joanne.
So we were using the definition pretty much provided by Aquafil, who does a chemical recycling for nylon. They require 85% of nylon to be the primary fiber. So we use up 85%. There are different types of recycling methods that use different thresholds. So when we look at advanced chemical recycling, they do tend to need more pure primary fibers. So that 15% might actually disqualify those materials from different recyclers. But we were using just kind of a 85% as a best case scenario. But some of the other recyclers in California, like Circular Polymers, who recycles PET outside of Sacramento, they can only take a 10% contamination. So again, that definition of recyclability is pretty tricky.
Okay, Joanne, this one's for you, and you'll have to be careful on not disclosing who our friends were that we got these from, but can you clarify where the textile came from in the CPSC's waste characterization study? Also, why they were initially deemed waste and then later 90% was characterized as sellable, trying to understand the disconnect between business needs, waste materials, traits, etc.
And a great reminder that we should use that word waste less often. So these were the clothes that were unable to be sold on the store floor and also in bulk in their outlets. So there are opportunities. They tried to sell them as is, so that's why they're kind of considered salvage. So I agree, I probably shouldn't have used the word waste. We went in thinking we were going to characterize the waste, and we left thinking, wow, everything's so usable.
Okay. Okay, so of the 90% of collected items, is there data that establishes what percent of those are in the end actually sold, and those that are not sold go where?
Yeah, so that 90% was using a Likert scale. So our staff that were characterizing that day do not have a background in textiles or sorting or grading, I should say. They come from a world of events trash. So that 90% was using a Likert scale of 1 to 5. 1 was a rating of sellable as is, and a 5, so 1 was sellable as is, 2 was needed a wash or an iron, a 3 was needed some sort of repair, a 4 meant it needed to be recycled, it was not sellable, and a 5 was probably not even recyclable and needed to go to the landfill. And I'm happy to report we had no 5s.
Nice. Okay, this one's another question from Peter Mui. Peter, but I think she might have just answered part of this. How about other fabric and textile goods, e.g. backpacks, luggage tents, pop-up canopies? Has anyone studied those?
I know the Outdoor Industry Association is really doing a lot of leadership in some of those other products that use textiles. CPSC in our studies, we're focused on garments and post-consumer textiles.
Okay.
We did not include those product types.
Alexa, I think this one's for you. Divert textiles to local schools, designers?
Are they asking if designers?
Yeah,
I didn't understand the question.
Comment, but I think it's a good question. Could these things be diverted to local schools and maybe get distributed through the kids to the parents and stuff?
That's a good question. I haven't explored that.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I think I wanted to just chime in a little bit more about that 90% that you referred to, Joanne, with the characterization study, and that those were getting marketed, right? Many of which was going overseas, correct? And so I think when we say sellable, it was already getting sold. Isn't that correct? In the characterization study, it was just getting sold to potentially international market. Is that correct?
Potentially international or rags, yeah.
Or rag market. So, I mean, I think part of our goal is how do we keep materials more local and do what this last comment said, you know, is there opportunities for local designers to be able to get access to some of these resources, and how can we keep the economy more localized?
Absolutely, and not just access, but financial support. Let's help them get it branded, build their website, and repair to scale.
Okay, we're down to a couple more minutes. I'll pick and choose here from the last questions. We will get answers to all the other questions that you've posed, because I believe we're able to save these and respond back to the attendees who've asked them. Another question that just moved on me. Sorry, I just lost the question I was about to ask. It got bounced on me. What can this Redwood City single family do with the clothes unsuitable for thrift stores and our scraps from quilt making? That's an interesting question.
And that's a tough one to answer right now, because the thrift stores are already bearing such a big burden, but they're more likely to get recycled if you directly take them to a collection site, if your local community does. But at this point, there's really not a lot of collection infrastructure for those scraps and recycling bound materials. So we need to act quickly. There was another question about working with Evernew and other startups, and the answer is absolutely. And that's really what stewardship organizations are really driven to promote innovation, to promote leadership, and to give equitable access to those who are making a difference.
Okay, what are your thoughts on reducing clothing overstock?
I think it's one of the low-hanging fruit for the brands to take responsibility for. I think there's a lot of opportunity. If it's pre-consumer, you are reducing a lot of the contamination and a lot of the other risks of, wear and tear, deformation after washing. So materials that are pre-consumer, I think, are a lower hanging fruit and easier for brands to act on quickly. Finding opportunities to, repair, repurpose, or resale in a different fashion. But it does look like we're at time, so thank you very much to everyone. We all appreciate your participation. Our website is on the screen, and you can email us if you think of any questions that did not get an opportunity to be addressed. We will share the slides upon request, but the recording will be shared automatically with everyone who registered. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.